Whenever we think of civil rights, some can think of typical leaders like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, so on and so on. However, we rarely think about it being the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, our founding fathers. Why does the civil rights have to do with the beginning of America? Whenever you hear the first three words of the preamble, what is it? It's okay if you don't know it. It is we the people. We the people. Back then, who were people? White property-owning men. Nobody else was considered a person because they were not guaranteed the same rights as everybody else. So why is that important? Why is that important today in 2020? I think this past year we have seen so far a lot of civic unrest from rights, from the Black Lives Matter movement. And so today I'm here to inform you of the history, the importance, and the significance of the civil rights movement starting back in 1776. So in 1776, we all know the Declaration of Independence was signed, Thomas Jefferson wrote it, and we, of course, have slavery. Now that was a big economic importance back then, 1776, especially in the South. But we again come back to the phrase, we the people. Now I want you to remember that phrase. I say it over and over again because it is important. Have any of y'all ever heard of the Dred Scott case? Dred Scott versus Sanford?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well, we'll come back to that, but remember, we the people, Dred Scott case, that will be important later on. So how, again, does the Declaration of Independence lead to this? Well, as I've said, it was slavery. They were not people. Well, the Dred Scott case, as I mentioned before, was a court case that involved a freed man returning over state lines to a slave state. Once he returned, they did not proclaim him as a citizen because he was, in fact, still a slave in that state, even though he was a free man in another. So again, civic unrest, no rights were given to African Americans at this time. And how does this all lead? Well, again, this leads all the way to Reconstruction. Post-Civil War, we have the Reconstruction Act where blacks can work on farms, plantations for pay. However, they are not allowed to vote. There are ways for them to not vote. They have the poll tax. They have Jim Crow laws. Back then, African Americans were slaves. They had no educational rights. They did not learn how to read. And so the poll tax, they also didn't have enough money. They couldn't pay for the right to vote. And they also couldn't read, enhancing the amount of white people who voted versus black people. It was not a thing back then. And then we come to the civil rights movement that everybody knows about. 1954, Brown versus Board happens. Does anybody know what Brown versus Board of Education established?
In Arkansas.
You think of Little Rock 9, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, you think of desegregation. Desegregation was Brown versus Board, 1954. Well, you would think that would mean equal rights. Jim Crow goes away. It's the Equal Protection Clause, correct?
Yes.
That's not the case. It's not the case. We did not have an act for civil rights until 1964, after Martin Luther King, after Rosa Parks, after all these important leaders have been moved on. And still today we see civic unrest. And why is that? Why do black people get seen as different as even Hispanics or whites or any other ethnicity? It goes back to the idea that we the people, we have historically, Eurocentrism has leaked into the idea that black people are not essentially worth the same value as white people. And so why is this important? Why am I talking about this in 2020? Again, Black Lives Matters movement, it's still a big movement. It will always be a big movement because the civic unrest will never go away. So we go through, as I've said, 1776, and then we moved on. We moved on over and over, all the way to 2020. We have seen unrest. And so what can we do today? Educate yourselves. Educate your children. teach them kindness, teach them equality, but also teach them the history of civic unrest so that they one day can make a difference.
Very good.